certain rights, but those rights are all underscored with basic responsibilities, one to the other, including the saving of life, the preservation of life.
In history, there are many events which challenge the basic human rights of life and freedom from oppression. During the Korean War, many had to take responsibility for protecting these rights and fight for those who were unable to fight for themselves. In December of 1950, 6 months into the Korean War, about 98,000 Koreans were gathered in Hungnam, North Korea. A few days earlier, the communist North Koreans and Chinese destroyed everything and anyone in their path. They had the Chosin Reservoir completely surrounded. Those who were able grabbed any possession they could carry and fled. The 5-year-old ship, the SS Meredith Victory, was a 10,000-ton freighter. It was one of 534 Victory ships built to transport supplies during World War II. The SS Meredith Victory and other Victory ships were perfect for traveling in the shallow water off the Korean coast. Many of them were recommissioned for the Korean War. Leonard LaRue was the 37-year-old captain of the SS Meredith Victory. He was also a veteran of World War II. On December 9th, the U.S. Army announced that they were going to evacuate the Chosin Reservoir. The U.S. troops decided that they could not leave all of the South Korean refugees to the mercy of the communist North Koreans, so they decided to try and evacuate some civilians from Hungnam and the surrounding villages. The evacuation went on 24 hours a day in 14-degree weather. This evacuation began on December 19th with 6 transports. The civilians were increasingly scared with the sounds of approaching enemy gunfire and the fear of not getting on a ship. After being involved in the Incheon invasion, the Meredith Victory was ordered to deliver jet fuel from Tokyo to Busan. After only partially unloading, Captain Leonard LaRue received urgent orders to go to Hungnam. On December 23rd, the SS Meredith Victory arrived in Hungnam. The Meredith Victory was escorted to shore by a Navy minesweeper. Colonel John Childs of the Army's 10th Corps came aboard the SS Meredith Victory to talk about evacuation plans. He told them that the Army's 3rd Infantry Division was holding the defense perimeter, but the enemy was closing the gap quickly. This gave the rescuers only a short window of time to help the refugees. The colonel told LaRue, "We cannot order you to take them, but we ask if you would volunteer to take your ship in and take some of those refugees off the beach. We ask you to confer with your officers and decide." LaRue didn't hesitate. He did not confer with anyone. He responded that he would take his ship in and take off as many refugees as he could. Despite the risk to their own lives, the crew followed Captain LaRue's orders without hesitation. Captain LaRue knew that taking responsibility for the refugees would put him and others at risk, yet he could not stand by and watch the rights of the people be stolen. The engineer on the SS Meredith, Merle Smith, said, "There were accommodations only for our 35 crew members and our 12 officers. We had space for 12 other people, but not accommodations. We didn't have 12 extra beds or 12 extra anything." To load the refugees, the crew set up a ramp from the Navy landing ships to the Meredith Victory. After 5 years of communist oppression, when the Koreans saw the ship, they went crazy with the thought of possible freedom. All of the refugees were loaded on the ship and stood in the cargo holds without food, light, or heat. There were no doctors or sanitary facilities on board. These cramped holds seemed very uncomfortable, yet the refugees were happy to board just to escape the oppression. The refugees were weary and hopeful for a new life of freedom. While the evacuation was in progress, the U.S. troops began to withdraw and the city was ablaze with enemy gunfire. Captain LaRue was afraid that some of the shots fired by other American ships might fall short and hit the SS Meredith Victory. Each minute, the people became increasingly frightened and chaotic for fear of not getting on a ship. The crew members did everything they could to keep the refugees calm. The loading of the refugees began at 9:30 p.m. on December 22nd and was not complete until 11:10 the next morning. They added cargo platforms to increase the capacity. They fit a total of 14,000 refugees on the ship. One officer said, "It's crazy, like the joke that clowns play in the circus, where a dozen giants get into one tiny car." Captain LaRue said, "Despite all of the obvious risks, all our lights were switched on while we prepared to load. We were sitting ducks, perfectly outlined by the glare, yet no enemy shells struck even close. One of our own heavy guns could have easily lobbed a shell into the crush of people by mistake, yet none did." The ship was still carrying about 300 tons of jet fuel from the previous mission. Captain LaRue said that a spark could turn the ship into a funeral pyre. Bob Lunney, a World War II veteran, said that the situation was an amphibious operation in reverse, with no precedent in military history. Right before they left, a jeep came racing towards the SS Meredith Victory. The lieutenant on the jeep told Captain LaRue, "The Criminal Investigation Division just received a tip that there may be some communists aboard disguised as refugees." The U.S. troops had to blow up the supplies in Hungnam so the enemies couldn't get to them. The refugees' last view of Hungnam was the city in flames. On the journey to Busan, the ship sailed through the water laced with mines. All of the passengers stood in stoic silence. The crew members were sent to walk around the ship and make sure everyone was all right. While they were checking the holds of the ship, they noticed that many of the refugees were lighting fires on top of the fuel barrels. Since none of the crew members spoke Korean, they mimicked an explosion with their voice. The Koreans understood and immediately suffocated the flames. Once they had arrived in Busan, they were told that over 1 million refugees were already in the city, and there was no more space for the extra 14,000 refugees. They were told to go to the city of Kogito. While they were in Busan, they were able to unload a few of the sick people and those suspected of being communist sympathizers. Through much effort, Captain LaRue was able to procure a small amount of rice for the refugees. It was the night of Christmas Eve, and the sight on board was said to be very moving. Many crew members were handing out their own clothing, and the interpreters were able to calm down many of the refugees. On Christmas Day, the crew faced another challenge. They had to unload all of the refugees in Kogito. The island had no docks, which made their job increasingly difficult. The refugees were placed on square platforms that were used to raise and lower heavy equipment off a ship. They lowered 16 people at a time. One woman accidentally dropped all of her earthly possessions off the boat while trying to get on the platform. All she had left in the world was her life. The sight was heartbreaking. Once each set of refugees got off the ship, they did a half bow. There was no real joy in their faces because they knew that the journey to freedom was only beginning. Every single refugee survived the voyage against all odds. 5 babies were born on this 3-day voyage. They embarked on the voyage to freedom with 14,000 people on a 12-passenger ship and completed the voyage with 14,005. Captain LaRue remained captain of the SS Meredith Victory until it was decommissioned in 1952. After that, Captain LaRue joined a monastery in New Jersey and became a Benedictine monk. He only left the monastery once. He left to accept the Gallant Ship Award from Congress. In 2000, the community of monks was going to close down due to the lack of vocations. To save LaRue's monastery, Korean missionaries came and rejuvenated the community. Some of these missionaries had been saved by the Meredith Victory 50 years earlier. If Captain LaRue and the crew of the SS Meredith Victory had not taken responsibility for the refugees, 14,000 lives may have been lost. Despite the risks, this rescue was important to assist in because every human life is valuable and communism usurps that basic human right. This event should be remembered, not to glorify the heroic actions, but to recognize the value in taking responsibility for those who are unable to fight for their own rights.
The very obvious importance of this trip was the saving of lives, and that to me is probably one of the more critical and one of the most important things a person can do in their own lifetime, is